Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, from the halls of Montezuma to the streets of L.A., the Marines have landed in the City of Angels. They are there to help local law enforcement and federal law enforcement keep the peace. What actually happened in L.A., and where is it going? We're going to unpack that today. The co-host of the program, of course, is Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent. I thought you were going to do a different chant that I think is making its way throughout Southern California. From the Valley to the 10, Los Angeles will be theirs again, I think. Seems to be.
Is that a real thing?
No, I just made that up. But it's not bad, right?
It's very good. It's very good.
And I just want to be very clear, as we're going to discuss, there's big money up for grabs with some of these anti-immigration movements. So if you like the kind of chanting or slogan manufacturing stylings of Eric Eggers, hit me up later. You can find me on social media.
Yeah, well, I tell you, this is a really interesting story because there's a lot of information that's being put out by mainstream media, some people on the right, some people on the left, that I think have failed to capture what's really going on here. And so we're going to unpack it. We're going to be driven by facts, by research, by information. We want to explain sort of what triggered all of this. How did we get to these riots happening? The second thing is looking at who's actually involved on the street. And the final question is, where is this actually going? Is this just going to die out, or is this something that we can expect to see more of in the future? So let's start first of all with what started all of this, what triggered all of this. The conventional view is that there were just some, day laborers at Home Depot minding their own business. The Gestapo, also known as ICE, showed up, grabbed them. People were so outrageous, it was spontaneous, that they decided to protest, and that's how we got here. Is that, in fact, what happened?
That is not our understanding of what happened. Now, that has happened. Like there have been ICE raids throughout the country, different places, and that's been part of the new administrations. They said, we're going to crack down on illegal immigration. That has happened. That does not appear to have been what prompted this, however. And you flagged this. So none other than Tom Homan gave an interview to Morning Joe, and he said exactly how this began. And why it began this way, I think, matters a lot to what's actually happening on the ground. Listen to this.
When your appointment was announced, you said that ICE, your agency, would focus on national security threats and public safety threats. Were there public safety threats in the Fashion District and at that Home Depot in these raids we've seen?
Yeah, and that's what no one's talking about. The Fashion District wasn't an immigration raid. It was a service of 3 criminal warrants at locations based on a large criminal conspiracy that ICE is investigating. That has to do with money laundering, tax evasion, and customs fraud, where a company underdeclared over $80 million in goods, failed to pay $17 million in fees, and it's part of an overall conspiracy on numerous businesses that they believe that some of this money is being laundered in Mexico and Colombia to fund cartel activity. So this was a criminal investigation that they all responded to in the beginning. That's how it all started. But the facts never got out. Even though we put the facts out, the media didn't cover it. They just said immigration raids, we're separating families and all the negative information we hear all the time. We took a lot of bad people off the street last couple of days. A Vietnamese national that attended a graduation party was kicked out and came back and killed 2 young people, two young Americans. We arrested a child predator. We arrested someone for sexual misconduct.
Yeah, so very interesting because that's not what we've been told. Criminal warrants have been issued, drug cartel activity potentially involving money laundering. And of course, some of the people rounded up, he mentioned it, but you have Eswin Uriel Castro, who previously deported an illegal alien who has been convicted of molesting a child and being armed with a deadly weapon. He's also been charged with robbery and domestic violence. Another gentleman who's been convicted of vehicular manslaughter was picked up. Another gentleman, an illegal alien from Nicaragua, who has child cruelty charges against him. So it's not as it was presented. This was not day laborers at Home Depot. This was actually a strike against organized crime, potential cartel activity, money laundering, and really bad dudes.
Yeah, and I think while the bad dudes thing is important, and the Trump administration makes a big deal about talking about these aren't, if they're illegal immigrants, then they are by their definition already criminals. But it's not just that. These are also people with additional criminal activity, and that's part of the rationale for the activity. But I don't think we can skip over, because we're going to talk about, these other groups that are participating. We'll talk about, Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, and they're sort of standing on behalf of the immigrants, and there's these taxpayer-funded NGOs, and that's all really interesting and important. But I think if you look at what's happening, all the now resistance that's been created, and you've got rioting in the streets, you've got looting, you've got all kinds of stuff. And if you look at it as, hey, they were trying to crack down on money laundering by the Mexican cartel on American soil, and now you see all of this manufactured resistance with taxpayer-funded domestic allies, I think it puts it in a different perspective than you're seeing kind of anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, what you're suggesting, which is true, is these raids against what are believed to be cartel activity, money laundering. He said tens of millions of dollars, I believe, in the clip. Lots of money is at stake. That would give the drug cartels a motive to try to gin up resistance and opposition. There's a motive factor there for the cartels to act.
Well, absolutely. And by the way, and I don't know that we fully appreciate just how baked into the American economy some of this cartel money laundering is, and we'll talk about how baked into the Mexican economy money coming from the United States is. But I was talking to our colleague and someone who's written a book on California, Jed McFadder, and we were looking at some of the coverage of the news raids and talking about the money laundering piece of it. And Jed said, just before we started thinking about this, he goes, if they actually do a full-time crackdown on money laundering in the cartels and on illegal immigration, which, this was an action. This is not necessarily an ongoing thing. He goes, if they make a concerted effort to crack down on money laundering in the cartels and illegal immigration, they will not complete construction in time for the Los Angeles Olympics next year.
Oh, man. That's why Gavin Newsom's so mad.
No, but that's probably a real thing.
Yeah, no, it is. It is, absolutely. So you have the initial purposes of the raid, according to Tom Homan. You had these criminal filings that led to this movement on cartel action. They arrested some of these bad hombres, as Trump would say. But you had the initial reaction from the community. Now, there's an organization named Union del Barrio that had set up, this was reported in the Los Angeles Times and elsewhere, earlier this year, had set up a early warning network in Los Angeles. They had a network of volunteers and of people around the community that when they saw ICE vehicles, when they saw Homeland Security vehicles, the SUVs that are riding around, they would alert the organization. Then the organization would send out word on social media to their contacts in the networks to say, hey, there's ICE activity on the corner of this street. We need to go there and respond. They appear to have been the trigger for the response. So in other words, it wasn't spontaneous. There was a network set up. What do we know about this group, Union del Barrio? Is this just some sort of calm civil rights organization?
Yeah, it's an innocuous neighborhood watch kind of thing. No, it's not actually. If you go to their website, and we'll actually
This is their own website.
This is their own website. This is their own words of what they profess to espouse. On the website it says, quote, "We hope to unite all oppressed people in the Aztlan, Mexico Occupado, regardless of national origin and citizenship, to join the process of building a revolutionary, reunified, and socialist Mexico, ultimately advancing Simón de Bolivar's dream of a unified continent." So this group who has this grassroots network where they're alerting people about the presence of ICE and the presence of immigration enforcement says on their website that they're trying to help recreate a revolutionary, reunified continent, or for Mexico.
Yeah, and by the way, to be clear, when they say reunified, they believe that California and Arizona and New Mexico should all go back to Mexico. So this is their revolutionary goal. The organization says in their own words. So they are the ones that kind of triggered the initial response.
And that seems kind of crazy and far out until you listen to this person that was interviewed by a journalist. This is just somebody walking around, and they said, hey, he's got Mexican flags and T-shirts, and we'll talk about a lot of these images of people holding Mexican flags, and that matters a lot when you consider perspectives like this.
We don't agree with the term illegal. We're undocumented. We've been here for thousands of years before you guys showed up, screw up everything. We think we should organize together with the U.S. working class and fight together and create a better system. We're anti-capitalist. We think socialism does work, real socialism, not Venezuela, not Cuba, not any of that crap that they try to sell us as socialism. And we believe it would be a more humane system that will take care of most of all people's necessities.
Is there a country we can look to kind of model the socialism idea?
The only model would be Soviet Union the first 4 years. After that, it became a mess. Sadly, there was a bureaucrat leadership that grew out of that, but it has to do mainly with the attacks of the U.S. and all big powers against that system that was working. In the few years that it lasted, it showed the world that it could do much better than capitalism.
So I love the precision, by the way. The first 4 years of the Soviet Union were great.
What you just heard from is a communism connoisseur. Okay, he's like, I want early communism. Later stage communism, it's a little acidic, it's a little repressive.
Right.
But
the point is, this is one protester, albeit one protester of many that were out there, but espousing the views of Union del Barrio, which sort of organized the first resistance to it. Now, then other organizations got involved, right? You mentioned, for example, the teachers' unions have kind of embraced this, but there's also a group in California, a nonprofit organization. You were telling me this. I did not believe this. One of the protest organizations that is now protesting Department of Homeland Security actually has received grants from our federal Department of Homeland Security. Is that actually true?
That is true, and they got those grants with the help of none other than Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. So she brags on her website last year. So this is an organization called Coalition for Humane Immigration Rights, or CHIRLA. Now, Data Republican and some other Twitter accounts have kind of done a great job of unpacking and going through the different money that they've received from various federal agencies. New York Post has followed up on this, but they got $34 million from the government in 2023. That's up from $12 million the year before, and that includes up to $450,000 in grants from the Department of Homeland Security under the Biden administration. This is the best part, for, quote, citizenship in education and training. So an organization that advocates for humane immigration rights, advocates, for citizenship, education, and training. So obviously they're trying to help move people from one category to another. And as we mentioned, Karen Bass takes a lot of credit. They also got $1.3 million from the Small Business Association for COVID relief in 2020, and have gotten grants from Jeff Bezos's ex-wife as well. So, I mean, this is a group that receives money from different liberal organizations, including the federal government under Joe Biden. And they're out there helping to organize a lot of these protest activities that are taking place currently.
It's amazing. And that's the thing that's interesting is, you see all the chaos, you see the cars burning, you see the looting, but these are organized protests. I mean, it's not just random people that are showing up. One of the other organizations, PSL, if you look at a lot of the signs that people are carrying, it says PSL Web. PSL stands for Party for Socialism and Liberation. This is a group that we're familiar with, featured it in my book, Blood Money. Why is it featured in Blood Money? Well, because it is a Chinese-aligned group. You had the gentleman earlier who was saying that the best part of socialism was Soviet Union from 1917 to 1921. This group says it's communist China. They pledged allegiance to communist China, and they are funded, some of their activities are funded by a guy named Roy Singham, who's an American billionaire who sold his business and moved to China, which is where he now lives full time. He has aligned himself with the Chinese Communist Party, and they are in the streets supporting and organizing protests as well.
So, fun fact, this just shows you how much the conversation has changed, because I'm old enough to remember when your book Blood Money came out. Joe Biden was president. You're like, look, China's at war with us. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Here are the people who are participating. You talked about Roy Singham and his group. Now, we now have, as of today, representative from Congress, Anna Paulina Luna, said that House Oversight Committee is going to issue a formal document request to Mr. Singham regarding the funding of his communist group that's linked to the LA riots. So, you reported on this and how he helped foment a lot of social unrest during the summer of 2020. It's interesting, right? We had Harmeet Dillon on. We talked about 5 years ago was this summer of Black Lives Matter, and there was COVID and everything else. It seems like there's an organized effort to recreate that same energy. And some of the same players are participating. I mean, including Roy Singham-funded Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Yeah, and so let's talk next about where this is going, because that's sort of the interesting question. Some people are saying, well, this is just kind of spontaneous. It's going to kind of die out. The Marines have showed up. You don't want to mess with the Marines. But there are elements already that are taking this to other cities. There's been some violent disruptions in San Francisco, I think Austin, Texas. And there's a protest, a nationwide protest that's going to be organized. Is it June 14th or something like that? Tell us about that and who's behind it.
So June 14th is a group called No Kings. It's the website nokings.com.
Sounds like a band.
I believe that you think it sounds like a band, Mr. Smooth Jazz. So
No Kings.
We really should do a whole other podcast on Schweizer's set list. But that aside, and that is actually something that is being organized and actively promoted by a number of groups that are affiliated with teachers unions affiliates. Randy Weingarten has been hosting calls, and it's interesting because they're trying to, I think, 1,400 different locations around the country.
Wow.
They're saying they're going to have organized protests. At least that's the goal. June 14th is going to be the 250th birthday for the United States military.
Yeah, Army, for the Army.
For the United States Army.
Yeah.
And also apparently is also Donald Trump's birthday.
Right.
And so it's meant to be something that pushes back against Trump's celebration of the military and himself, they say. And they say, look, we don't like what you're doing. And so it's the fusion of sending the National Guard to help protect Los Angeles against anti-immigration enforcement riots seems really well timed if you're trying to then have a bunch of protests against a military parade.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable, too, the role that the teachers' unions are playing, because, of course, there's a lot of criticism they get for the failures of American public education today. You've talked passionately about the damage they did in pushing for lockdowns and closing schools during 2020, during COVID. But this is an example of, this has nothing to do with public education.
Oh, absolutely
It
not.
has absolutely nothing to do with it. The myth out there that they are rounding up kids from high schools, that this is an education matter, is ridiculous. We gave you the names of some of the people that they're rounding up. This has nothing to do. It's part of a broader radical agenda. And why don't we have people like Randy Gardner focusing more on actually making our schools better rather than advancing this sort of radical social agenda?
Well, it's summertime. That's why. They don't have anything else to do as a way to stay relevant. But I'll tell you this. I think, Chirla, this group, they matter.
Yep.
The Party for Socialism and Liberation, they're printing the signs, they matter. There's a lot of other groups. This No Kings thing will be, I think, an effort to begin the organized resistance against Donald Trump. And we've heard about who's the leader of the Democratic Party, where's the resistance. I think they're seizing on this, and we'll see. But I think all that's, quite honestly, kind of window dressing. And I told you, I think if you want to use this metaphor, that all these people, I think they are ideologically aligned with the idea of being pro-migrant, anti-U.S. enforcement of border policy, of immigration law. But that's think of those people as the people dancing on the top of the building in the movie Independence Day. And they're like, oh, we welcome all these aliens. But they don't actually know who's in the ship. And I do think...
Do you think they care, though? Do you think that Randy Weingartner cares? Because when you look at who's being rounded up, these are child molesters, convicted child molesters, and they don't seem to care.
Right. I think that they don't necessarily realize how much all of this matters to Mexico and the Mexican cartels.
So they're the ones lurking in the background.
I think
you've got these nonprofits, but you've got the government of Mexico. And what you're saying is they're the ones that have so much to lose from this. So the government of Mexico, in part because of their ties to the drug cartels, right? If this raid was for drug cartels, if you look at some of the research, Annabelle Hernandez, she's a very highly regarded Mexican investigative journalist. She argues that both Lopez Obrador, AMLO, the last president, who is the mentor of the current president, who is Sheinbaum, that both Sheinbaum and AMLO were funded by the drug cartels. That would support your hypothesis that maybe there's more official action here.
And if you look at everything that's happened since, again, per our own border czar's words, this began as an effort to crack down on Mexican drug cartel money laundering operations.
Yeah.
And now it's become about something else. And, they're more worried about fighting what's happening in the streets and less about continuing to pursue cracking down on Mexican money laundering operations. It would seem like it's been a successful counteroffensive for that group. And so then you start saying, all right, well, why do they care so much? And you start talking about how much money are we talking about? And it's a significant amount of money. And you don't have to take our word for it. You can take Mexico's president's word for it and some other figures. So she said, because this is all happening. What else is happening right now? When we talk about money and everything else. There's in Trump's big, beautiful bill, and I didn't realize this till recently, there's actually a proposal that would tax U.S. remittances an additional 3.5%.
And there's some $60 billion that Mexicans living in the United States send back home. And so this would add an additional 3.5% tax on top of that.
So just because that's a big number, but we hear a lot of big numbers. So yeah, the amount of money that people send back to Mexico from here is $64.7 billion. For context, that's 3 to 5% of the Mexican GDP. So that's like the same thing as the United States telecom, software, and online media industry.
Yeah.
It's a real number.
Yeah.
It's a significant portion of their economy, and we're talking about adding a tax to it. Now, because of all these protests and all these things, there's now some proposals that will increase that remittance tax even higher. Some are saying 15%. But that proposal is what prompted Mexican President Sheinbaum to say, quote, "It's not about raids or violence, but rather working on a comprehensive reform that takes into account the Mexicans on the other side of the border." But she said, like, we will mobilize if this proposal is continued. Like they are calling for organized protest against this.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So you've got lots of players here. This is about a lot more than the ICE raids that allegedly were the trigger. So we're going to keep monitoring this story, following this story. One of the things we would encourage everybody to do is look out for misinformation from both sides. There are images that are being shared on social media that claims that the Marines have actually opened fire on the streets of LA. That's not true. That actually is video footage from a 1983 movie called Blue Thunder. I was in prime movie attendance during the 1980s. I was in high school. I don't remember Blue Thunder, so it must not have been a very good movie. But so there's a lot of misinformation out there. There was another image people were sharing. It was a pallet of bricks. People were saying, oh, bricks are being dropped off. We heard the same rumors during the 2020 protests. Turns out that pallet of bricks actually is from a construction site in Malaysia, not in Los Angeles. So the point is, just verify when you see things on social media. You have all kinds of people that A, want to get attention, and the way you get attention is by putting outlandish things up, and B, that have sort of an agenda. They want to try to drive one side of the argument or the other. We're going to keep monitoring this story, and of course, we're always going to be driven by facts, not by just images that are being tossed around on social media.
Well, one fact is true that in Breitbart reported this is that Mexico is providing legal aid for the Mexican migrants that are detained as part of these raids. So again, I just think while the focus is going to be on Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, and Trump's going to go after those people, and you have the activity in the streets, and did Trump accelerate it because by sending the National Guard, which you think is total nonsense, right? Like,
it's the classic example of when somebody engages in aggressive behavior and they're doing something that somebody else is making the situation worse by actually trying to restore law and order. That's not true. I mean, if you start a bar fight and the cops show up and you get more violent, guess what? You're still at fault. You're the one that started the bar fight, and that's essentially what happened here.
Well, that is what happened, and so they're trying to take care of it. But there's also there's tariffs and there's everything else. But it's crazy to think that while everything else is happening, and we'll continue to see if there's additional looting, and it's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate. It's another summer where you're seeing people, protests turn into property destruction, violence, and you worry that it will continue to get worse. But it's especially, I think, sad when you think that that's actually not even what this is really about, right? This is about them trying to crack down on what's happening in Mexico, and then Mexico's fighting back using, I think, unsuspecting but ideologically aligned Americans and tax money to kind of help keep them from fighting against Mexican drug cartel money laundering.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know you have lots of options. You can find out more about the research we do at thedrilldown.com. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate your support and encouragement. Thanks again. Until next time.